The word tone and intonation. As you see, the word intonation seems like it contains the word tone in it, right? Intonation. But does it really contain tone in it, technically? Are they the same thing called differently, or are they different but they have similarities? I have talked about tone before, at least in the last 2 videos. I introduced the concepts of pitch and frequency and emphasized how closely the term tone is tied to pitch. We also talked about the fact that through a process that is called tonogenesis, certain languages have historically developed into tonal languages or tone languages, as opposed to those that have not, which are called atonal languages. My assumption would be that there are more atonal languages than there are tonal languages. I also mentioned Mandarin Chinese as a language which is typically used as an example of a tonal language with 4 tones. There's a typical example of the word ma. Depending on what tone it is pronounced with, it can mean a different thing. Therefore, you can see that tone is basically an integral part of the syllable, if not the vowel, in Chinese. You use accent marks to mark these tones in tonal languages. Even though the alphabet of those languages may be different, like in the case of Chinese, you can transliterate them using the Latin alphabet, and you can use these accent marks on top of the vowels to mark the tones. Feel free to watch the video that is called Tone versus Accent. You can also watch the video Tone versus Stress. I also have a video called Frequency and Pitch, which would better give you a deeper insight into this whole discussion. The word intonation is a term in phonology to describe a suprasegmental quality. It refers to the way the patterns of pitch or melody are used distinctively. The word intonology may be used to refer to the study of intonation. There are various ways, various approaches to the analysis of intonation. One approach is to look at the pitch patterns as contours in terms of levels of pitch. And there's even terms such as pitch phoneme or pitch morpheme. There's other approaches in which such patterns may be described as tone units or tone groups, understood in contrast to nuclear tone, tonicity, etc. In these technical discussions of intonation, a distinction is made between the 3 variables of pitch range, height, and direction. In some other approaches, in pragmatics, for example, there is a broader notion of intonational phrasing, or a formal category of intonational phrase, which is a structured hierarchy of the intonational constituents in conversation. Intonation can help us create certain constituents within speech. Intonation has actual functions in language. Intonation is a feature of a spoken language, and it is used to signal grammatical structure. Probably the most interesting way to look at intonation is to consider intonation as the spoken equivalent of punctuation. Therefore, you could say intonation is a feature of speaking or spoken language, while punctuation is a feature of writing or written language. Why do we use punctuation marks in written language? Obviously, considering that spoken language was there first before written language, and writing was later developed to reflect speaking, punctuation marks were actually an attempt to reflect certain features of spoken language in writing, probably most importantly, intonation. Again, in spoken language, intonation marks sentence, it can mark clause, it can mark other boundaries within grammatical structure. You have probably heard people ask in conversation, "Are you asking me or are you telling me?" That is a question about intonation. Because when you ask a question, your intonation is rising, your pitch is rising, but when you're telling something, your pitch would be falling. He's going, isn't he? Rising intonation, rising pitch. He's going, isn't it? That's kind of, there could be some sort of sarcasm, but it would be telling. As you can see in written language, in the first case, I have used a question mark to mark rising intonation. And in the second instance, I've used an exclamation mark to mark falling intonation and also to say the person is telling something. He or she is not asking something. Intonation versus tone. Again, as I told you, in the discussion of tone, we have rising tone, falling tone, and tone is based on pitch. But tone functions at syllable level. Intonation, on the other hand, functions at phrase or clause level, or you could say at utterance level. Intonation is basically a sequence of pitch levels. Since you already know what pitch is, you can look at intonation as a sequence of pitch levels or tones. In other words, intonation is pitch modulation in whole utterances. An intonation unit bundles together words and information chunks to convey meaning, attitude, and function. Let me give you an example. In English, if I write, "It's me, Tom," it can be an ambiguous sentence. Obviously, we can use punctuation marks to resolve the ambiguity, to eliminate the ambiguity. In speaking, we don't have punctuation marks. How do we achieve the same purpose? There's two possible interpretations. I can say, "It's me, Tom." It means that my name is Tom. Or I could say, "It's me, Tom." It means I'm talking to Tom and I'm letting Tom know that this sound that he heard is me. When you say, "It's me, Tom," in this interpretation of the sentence, you have two intonation groups. You have two units of intonation. And in each unit, one syllable is the most prominent, which is called the tonic syllable because it takes a tone. The first intonation group is "it's me," with the tonic on me. The second intonation group is Tom, which contains one syllable, and that syllable is the tonic syllable. "It's me, Tom." You see here, I'm having two intonation groups. In a way, I'm kind of pausing to distinguish, to signal that there are two intonation groups. In the second interpretation, the speaker is addressing someone called Tom. In this case, there is a single intonation group. The entire utterance is just one intonation group. And where is the tonic syllable? Me. Listen again, in the second interpretation, "It's me, Tom." There is only one tonic syllable in every intonation group. In the first interpretation, because there are two intonation groups, you will have two tonic syllables. As you can see, here intonation is used to communicate meaning. But intonation can be used to communicate personal attitude. For example, in the example when I said, "He's going, isn't he?" If it was a question, or "He's going, isn't he?" You're expressing the attitude that you know that the person is going. Intonation as a phonological tool can be used for different purposes, including personal attitude, sarcasm, puzzlement, anger, etc., in which one signals contrasts in pitch among other prosodic and paralinguistic features. Intonation may even have a sociolinguistic function. It may signal your social background. There is the concept of neutral intonation. For example, the sentence in English, "John went to the pub." The neutral or the least marked intonation has pub as the tonic syllable, because the basic rule for determining the tonic syllable in English is that it is the last lexical item in a clause. If I write this sentence for you and I ask you to read it, the default reading would be the neutral intonation, "John went to the pub." Obviously, I could read this sentence with different intonation patterns. For example, to mark different emphasis for a different meaning, I could say, "John went to the pub." Here, I'm marking "went" as the tonic syllable. "John went to the pub." Here, "John" would be the tonic syllable. Those would be different semantic purposes that I could fulfill by changing the intonation pattern.